I found her on a Tuesday. Not that Tuesdays mean anything out here in the Kareth corridor, where the stars don't care what day it is, and the debris fields stretch for 10,000 kilometers in every direction. But I remember it was a Tuesday because I had just finished my second cup of terrible instant coffee, the kind that tastes like brown water with ambition. And I was thinking about how there was no reason for any human being to be this far from home. My name is Marcus Hale. I run a one-man salvage operation on a ship called the Rusted Meridian, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. I cut apart broken things and sell the pieces. It is not heroic work. It does not make the news. Most days, the only voice I hear is my own, and even that gets old after a while. The Dominion transport had been drifting for about 3 days before I found it. Big vessel, commercial class, the kind the Dominion used to move goods across their trade lanes. It had taken some kind of engine failure and just stopped. No crew aboard. They had evacuated apparently, and left the cargo behind. That happened more than people like to admit out here. Cargo was replaceable. Crew were expensive. I was halfway through cutting the hull plating when my bioscan beeped. I stopped, looked at the screen. The reading was faint and strange, a heartbeat, but with an odd doubled rhythm, like two drums playing slightly out of time with each other. Not human, something alive, inside a sealed cargo pod near the back of the ship. I told myself it was probably a malfunction, equipment glitch. The bioscan on the Rusted Meridian was older than most of the debris I collected, but I went to check anyway. The pod was standard Dominion issue, gray metal, no windows, sealed with a coated lock. I burned through it with my plasma torch in about 40 seconds. The lock fell to the floor. I pulled the door open. She was curled in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes shut. She was small, smaller than I expected, with pale skin that had a faint blue glow to it, the kind of glow you see in deep ocean creatures, beautiful and quiet and strange. 4 fingers on each hand, silver hair matted against her face. She was wearing gray clothing several sizes too large, and around her neck was a metal collar with a number stamped into it. She was a velhari. I knew enough about the galaxy species to recognize them. I also knew enough to understand what the collar meant. She was Dominion property, flagged, numbered, legally owned under Dominion law. I stood there for a long moment. I thought about the nearest Dominion way station, 3 days away. I thought about the bounty they paid for returned cargo. I thought about how the law, such as it was out here, would be entirely on my side if I made that call. Then I thought about my sister, Maya, who was 11 years old when our father lost his job, and our family spent 4 months moving between shelters. And the look on her face the first time someone looked through her, like she was not there. I picked up my plasma torch and cut the collar off. It hit the floor with a hollow sound. The girl's eyes flew open, silver, wide, terrified, and she pressed herself into the corner so hard I thought she might go through the wall. I took 3 large steps back. I held up both hands, empty. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said. I did not know if she understood English. I said it anyway. "You're safe, I promise." She did not look like she believed me. She looked like she was calculating exactly how far away the door was. I left the door open. I left a bowl of food just inside, protein rations, which are not exactly a luxury meal, but they were warm. Then I went back to my work and let her decide what to do next. That was how the first day went. The second day, the food was gone. I left more, and a blanket, and a bottle of water. I did not go into the med bay where she had settled. I sat in the corridor outside with my back against the wall and read aloud from an old paperback novel I had carried across half the galaxy. A mystery story set in 1940s Chicago, full of rain and cigarette smoke and people with complicated motivations. She did not respond, but I could hear her breathing, slow and steady, just on the other side of the wall. On the third day, I was reading a particularly dramatic chapter. The detective had just figured out who the real criminal was, when a small voice came from inside the room. "Why do you read to empty rooms?" The voice was careful and accented, working hard around the sounds of trade cant, the pidgin language most spacefaring species used to talk to each other. I looked at the open doorway. She was sitting just inside, out of reach, watching me with those silver eyes. "Rooms aren't always empty," I said, "just because you can't see who's in them." She considered this for a long moment. Then she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and said nothing more. But she did not go back to the corner. We talked a little more each day after that, not about big things at first. She asked about the book, about the ship, about what salvage work actually was. She told me the Velhari had been warned about humans, that we were war creatures, dangerous and unpredictable, hired by the Dominion for muscle work. I told her that some humans were exactly like that, and I was sorry for it, and that some of us were just tired men with old paperbacks and bad coffee trying to get through the week. She almost smiled at that, almost. Her name was Sarah. She was 19 years old by Velhari counting. She had been taken from her family's transport ship 6 weeks before I found her, and she did not know if her family was alive. I did not tell her that I was afraid for her too. I just made sure she knew she was not going back to the Dominion. When we reached Harrow Point, a neutral trading station built into an old asteroid, run by a species called the Breath, who took money from everyone and answered to no one, I found her a berth on a refugee vessel heading toward Velhari Sanctuary space. It took most of my salvage cut from the last 3 weeks. I did not think twice about it. She stood at the docking tube with a small bag I had put together for her, rations, a medical kit, a hand warmer, and she looked at me for a long time without speaking. I took off my old Earth Defense Corps dog tags. I had worn them since I was 22 years old, since the day I finished my medic training and thought I was going to save the world. I had not saved much of anything in the end, but I had kept the tags. I pressed them into her hand. So you know, I said, that not all of us are what they told you. She looked at them, she looked at me. Then she walked down the tube and the door sealed behind her, and I watched the refugee vessel detach from the station and drift out into the dark, until it was just another light among lights. I went back to my ship. I drank bad coffee. I got back to work. I told myself that was enough, that doing the right thing and then getting on with your life was all a person could ask for, that the universe was large and full of broken things, and there was always more salvage to find. 6 days later, an unscheduled vessel locked onto my airlock without warning. I was not expecting company. Nobody who lives on the edge of civilized space is ever happy about surprise visitors. I grabbed the heavy wrench from my tool rack, not because I was violent by nature, but because experience had taught me that hope was not a reliable security strategy, and I opened the hatch. Sarah was standing on the other side. Behind her, filling the docking corridor, were 4 other Velhari, a man and a woman, both older, with the same silver hair and gentle bioluminescence that glowed a little brighter than Sarah's. A young boy, maybe 10 or 11, peering around the adults with enormous curious eyes. And behind all of them, a very old woman, so old that her glow had faded almost entirely, leaving just a faint pearl light across her skin, like moonlight on still water. Sarah had reached Sanctuary. She had told her people what happened, and they had tracked my ship's energy signature across 6 days of space to find me. I did not know what to say. I stood there holding a wrench like a person who had completely lost the ability to have normal reactions to anything. The old woman stepped forward. She moved slowly, carefully, with the kind of dignity that does not need to announce itself. She reached out and placed something in my free hand, closing my fingers around it gently. It was a stone, about the size of my palm, clear as glass, with something shifting inside it like light caught in slow water. Sarah said, "A memory stone. It holds a real moment. When you touch it with living skin, you feel what the person felt when the memory was made." The old woman said something in Velhari. Sarah translated quietly. She says, "Hold it, please." I set down the wrench. I closed both hands around the stone. The world did not disappear. Exactly. It was more like another world was placed directly on top of it. I was still standing in my own docking corridor, still aware of the cold metal under my boots. But I was also somewhere else entirely. I was in the cargo pod, not as myself, as Sarah. I felt what she had felt, the total darkness, the cold that had settled into her bones over days, the way she had stopped counting hours, because counting made the time worse. I felt the weight of her father's arm around her shoulders, felt his voice, low and wordless, humming something that was not quite a song but was trying to be one. I felt her mother's hand in hers, and the way her mother's lips moved silently in the dark, saying words Sarah knew were prayers without hearing them spoken. They had been in that pod for 9 days. Then the memory shifted. It moved forward in time. To the moment I cut open the door, I saw myself from the outside, standing in the harsh white light of my work lamp, plasma torch in hand, looking into that pod. I saw my own face. I had not known what my face looked like in that moment. You never really know what your face is doing when you are not thinking about it. I was looking at Sarah the way you look at something that should not have happened. Not with hunger, not with calculation, with a kind of raw, unguarded horror at what had been done to her, and underneath that, something quieter, something that did not need to be said out loud, because it was written clearly enough in the way I took 3 large steps back and held up both empty hands. She had seen it. She had kept it. She had carried that moment all the way to sanctuary, told the elders about it, and they had decided it was worth preserving in stone, worth traveling 6 days to return, because in all her life, through all of the things that had happened to her, no one had ever looked at her like she mattered, not like she was useful, or manageable, or a problem to be dealt with, like she simply, completely mattered. The memory ended. I was back in my corridor, alone in my own body, both hands around a warm stone. I had to sit down. There was no graceful way to do it. My legs just decided they were finished with standing, and I lowered myself to the floor and sat there with my back against the wall, the same wall I had sat against for 3 days reading to a room I pretended was empty. The stone was warm in my hands. My eyes were burning in a way that had nothing to do with the corridor lights. Sarah crouched down beside me, not close enough to crowd, close enough to be there. She did not say anything, and I was grateful for that, because I did not trust my voice to behave. The old elder spoke again. Sarah translated. She says, "We searched the galaxy for the ones who made us afraid. We found you instead. We give you this stone so that you will never forget what you are." A 10-year-old boy pushed past the adults, looked at my face with the fearless curiosity that only children have, and held out a small round piece of velhari bread, the kind that smelled like something warm and impossible to name. I laughed. It came out a little rough around the edges, but it was real. I took the bread. I stood up. I looked at all of them packed into my small, dented, gloriously impractical salvage ship, and I said the only thing that made any sense. "You should come in. I'll put on coffee. It's terrible. You'll hate it." We ate together in the small galley of the rusted meridian, crowded and loud and nothing like anything I had planned for my Tuesday. The boy asked 11 questions about the plasma torch. Sarah's father shook my hand for a very long time and did not say a single word, which said everything. The old elder accepted a cup of my terrible coffee, took 1 sip, and gave me a look that confirmed she had better taste than anyone else in the room. I kept the memory stone from that day forward in my breast pocket, right where the dog tags used to sit. People ask me sometimes why I do this work, sifting through wreckage at the edge of everything, alone. I tell them I'm looking for salvage. That's true enough. I just never expected salvage to look back.